This is Scott Becker, founder of Becker's Healthcare, the publisher of Becker's Healthcare. I'm also a partner at McGuireWoods. You are listening to Interview with the Surgeon Agent.
On this episode of Interview with the Surgeon, we welcome special guest Scott Becker, founder and the publisher of Becker's Healthcare and Becker's Hospital Review and its related events and publications. A partner in the national law firm McGuireWoods, he practices exclusively in the area of healthcare. A Harvard Law School graduate, author of 4 books, and leader in the healthcare profession, Mr. Becker provides legal and strategic services to ASCs. He provides counsel to hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, surgical hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, multi- and single specialty medical practices, and a wide variety of healthcare industry entrepreneurs. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Interview with the Surgeon. Today, we have a special guest, Scott Becker, founder and publisher of Becker Healthcare and partner at McGuireWoods, and also a fellow University of Illinois Fighting alumni. Scott, how are we doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. What a great pleasure to get a chance to visit with you today, and it's great what you're doing.
Thank you so much. So let's just jump right into it. So take us through your journey on how Becker's Healthcare got started and where you see it going in the future.
Sure. So, Matt, thank you very, very much. So Becker's Healthcare we started it now literally 28, 30 years ago, and really started in the surgery center area. Then about 14, 15 years ago, expanded to hospitals and health systems and orthopedics and spine. Then about 10 years ago, grew into health IT. It started, literally when we first got it started, it was a small newsletter, small conference, and trying to build a network, build relationships in the sort of healthcare sector, specifically in surgery centers. As it grew into a real media business that really includes, print magazines, which are, less and less of the business today, digital, webinars, websites, daily newsletters, and so forth, and then live conferences. The live conferences are obviously on hold for the year, and hopefully to get back to those sometimes in 2021. But the business has been a great opportunity to visit and connect across the healthcare sector and talk to so many interesting people over a very long period of time. So whether it's talking to great surgeons, great health system leaders, great politicians and celebrities, it's been just great fun. And we've built a great team at the Becker's Healthcare business, great editors-in-chief, great CEO, great chief operating officer, great sales team, great editorial team, and so forth. So we try and really cover the business landscape of the areas we're in. So whether it's orthopedics, spine, hospitals and health systems, surgery centers, health IT, we try and really be the go-to place related to the business of these areas. Our hallmark is short, concise content, easy to read, easy for people to get their hands around, not necessarily deep, long pieces, things that people can get a sense of. Here's what's going on in their business very quickly. So just a great pleasure, Matt. So we've been doing it now for 28, 30 years. We've had ups, we've had downs. It's been a fascinating journey.
That's great. So what are you hearing from health system executives about the obstacles they're facing in the recruiting, interviewing, and hiring process of surgeons with respect to the current pandemic?
Certainly. So the process of recruiting has moved more and more towards, a Zoom type world, a virtual type world, and so forth, and less to what it was, a lot of personal interaction, a lot of personal discussions, a lot of personal everything. I mean, obviously lots of phone calls and talking, but less personal visits. So there's all that. There's also hospitals and health systems are trying to deal with this dual challenge of taking care of COVID patients while running the rest of their systems. So you've had a ton of systems slow down on a lot of things while they've been dealing with COVID. And now I think more and more health systems are moving back towards the mindset that COVID is a service line, it's an area, but it's not everything. So we're not going to close down our entire health system going forward for COVID, whether we're going to operate our health system side by side with COVID and keep operating. So that bodes well for getting back into the business of regular recruiting and hiring and building out great surgical teams, building out great teams, and so forth. Certainly there's been some slowdown for a period of time because you'll slow down in hiring new talent while you're trying to figure out whether you're busy enough and what you have to do with existing talent. But I do see the tide starting to turn, even though the COVID tide may be turning a little bit slower than we'd like, but that's actually moving in the right direction too. Treatments are getting better. Vaccines seem to be at least on the horizon, if not the new horizon. And death rates are falling even though infections are growing. So it's a fascinating time, but health systems are more and more taking the position. This is a take-home point that it has to be COVID and everything else. It can't be COVID and stop everything else. So the more that it becomes the mindset, the more that hospitals and hospitals get back to normal.
Interesting. And when do you see that tide turning for that hiring process within the health system community?
I think it's going to be very different from system to system. If you're a very small system, you're going to have to be very careful on your spend for the next couple of years because you don't know where business is getting back to, and you're really trying to make sure you financially survive and get to the other side. If you're a larger system and can take the risk on it, you're going to keep on investing heavily in your surgical and other programs because it still remains the case that pays the bills for a lot of different things.
So what are your thoughts on physician employment versus private practice? That pendulum seems to swing every few years. So where are we now and how might COVID impact that?
Sure. So I think in terms of private practice versus employed by health systems, the world has largely moved towards employed by health systems, though in the core surgical specialties, orthopedics, neurosurgery, gastroenterology, ophthalmology, and a whole host of others, private practice is still alive and very, very healthy. In a lot of the rest of the world, primary care specialties, internal medicine, et cetera, it has really moved towards health system employment. In terms of where the jobs will be over the next few years, you've got lots of different issues and challenges. You're in a situation where the country as a whole has a shortage of specialists, even though people don't like to talk about it. There's just shortages. There's just not enough. Health systems still need them. Private practice still needs them. Private practices, you always have this fascinating challenge because in a private practice, it depends on the size of the practice. Large practices have become institutional, and it's not so much if we bring in the new person, he or she is cannibalizing our existing business. So there's still opportunities in the large practices. But even in the large private practices, where they've had to slow down on elective procedures, slow down on orthopedic spine, there's going to be more caution about hiring for some period of time. In terms of health systems, again, it's hard to put the crystal ball on what hiring will look like. But we assume people coming out of these residencies will all be getting jobs, will all get hired, but the options won't be as overflowing as they've been the last few years, which is the same as in most job markets. And so then it gets down to what's your preference? What seems stable? What seems exciting? Where's the opportunity? What are you trying to do? If you're a young surgeon who wants to be the greatest research physician as well, and there's no shortage of physicians that want that part of their life as well, sometimes you're better off tying to an academic medical center. In contrast, there are plenty of private practices that are very highly correlated with academic medical centers and big institutions, so you could have some of both. There's also the traditional private practice in smaller towns and cities and larger towns. That's really the true 3 to 5 or 10 person private practice. Those practices are a little more fragile often through this period of time and a little slower to hire because when they hire somebody at today's rates, it does come right out of the pockets of the existing partnership. So it's a little bit more challenging, a little slower, but sometimes there's more freedom in those practices in the long run. So a lot of it comes down to personal preference. Where do you see yourself? What do you want to be? Who are your role models? Who are your mentors? What looks like this is where I want to be in 20 years? This is where I want to be in 10 years.
Now, in the plastic surgery market here in Beverly Hills, a lot of the surgeons are starting to get busy again. What are you hearing as far as elective surgeries across the nation?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's very much all over the place. Like I was on the phone yesterday with the CEO of Orthopedic and Spine Institute. It's a large part of a large health system, and they're back to 90 to 95% capacity and busyness, which is a very healthy number, a very comforting number. It's all over the board, but it largely seems to be recovering. The thing is, with all these things, orthopedics and spine, oncology care, heart care, everything, cardiovascular care, people need these services. And so the big mind shift that I've seen over the last 6 months is it's not COVID or, it's COVID and. It's we have to find a way to do these things, not just because of the economics. They feed private practice, they feed systems, they feed everything, which is not unimportant, but because patients need these things. And so we do see a significant rebound underway, and hopefully that continues.
So based on your vast experience with physicians, health systems, and surgery centers, What are some of the mistakes you see young surgeons make early in their career?
Yes, it's a great question. So 2 or 3 big mistakes that we see. One is it's very, very important that you find the right fit for yourself where you can practice and become a great surgeon, become great at what you do. We're a big fan of people with an entrepreneurial urge. At the same time, we think the most important thing when you get going is establish yourself and make yourself a great physician. You have to be great at what you do. You have to be able to respect yourself, and you have to earn the respect of others. You have to be great at it. So that's number one. 2 is we're a big fan of, and it's particularly poignant this last several months or last couple of years, is you better not over leverage yourself. So don't buy the big house. Don't buy the crazy expensive condo. You don't have to overcar yourself. You don't have to overhouse yourself. The less debt that you take on, the less fragility you have, and the more freedom you have to ultimately live and design the life you want to live. So we're a big fan of not overextending yourself. Become a great surgeon. Don't overextend yourself. Try and make yourself great. Then as you develop your skills, you get busy, you work hard. It's very important to remember that everything in life is a mix of great competence and great relationships. So you can't just be great at what you do. You have to treat your partners, your patients, your staff great. They need to. People want to work with people, and they want to see people succeed that treat them well, that treat them nicely. So it's never lose sight of the fact that it's never about just competence. It's always competence plus relationships. So be a great surgeon. Don't over leverage yourself. Be focused on relationships and growth and your people around you. And those are a few pieces of advice. And so the advice comes from, and you asked the question about errors, but the advice comes out of both what I see people doing great and the errors I see people making. So I see people too early trying to be the next entrepreneurial surgeon, which is great, but you want to make sure your core characteristics, your core qualities as a surgeon are magnificent. I see people very much wanting to live the lifestyle they think a surgeon should have, and I get it. They've worked hard. They've gone through residency. They've gone through med school. Many have done fellowships. It's exhausting. They feel like they've earned it. Resist the urge to put yourself into a ton of debt. It makes you very fragile, and what that fragility does is it lessens your choices. It lessens your ability to have choices over time as to what you want to do. A young surgeon or anybody in career, as they know, you're going to have to work very hard for a period of time. You're going to have to largely like what you do, to love what you do, but recognize you're not going to like it or love it every day. I mean, the beauty of talking to surgeons and professionals like surgeons is they've already bought into that concept, that life is not going to be perfect every day. It's going to be a grind. It's going to be hard work. There's going to be greatness in it. You want to be great at what you do. You want to savor the human connections with your patients, your staff, your teams, everything else is so critical. But to like to love what you do, you got to keep it interesting, keep renewing yourself. You got to take care of yourself. It really is a marathon in terms of your professional career. You can't over leverage yourself, and I think you got to try and be great at what you're going to do.
What advice do you have for young surgeons considering buying into a surgery center?
I think, again, what happens with buying into a surgery center is you really have to know the practice and surgery center that you're buying into. You got to make sure you trust and like the people. You've got to understand it. You have to operate there some. You really got to, you can't view it as just a financial deal. It's got to be a good financial deal, but you can't be so anxious to buy in that you either over leverage yourself or you don't really understand what you're buying. You don't really understand the situation and so forth. It's just something to be done carefully, thoughtfully. Probably there's no way you should buy in for a couple years till you're a couple years out of into practice. People buy in right away, they end up making mistakes, and that's where you can help them, of course, as well. But they buy too little, they spend too much, they end up with non-competes, and those are all normal things. But you want to understand it fully before you tie yourself into anything. And you want to make sure, look, if I decide this is not where I want to be 3 years from now or 5 years now, is my investment lost? Is it tied up? Can I get out? Can I not get out? All those kinds of things. So I think you have to really take it just a little bit slower than a lot of guys want to, and a lot of women want to.
So do you see ASCs recovering from the shutdown and having a profitable year?
I don't know if ultimately they'll recover fully this year and have a profitable year. I mean, but if they got through the three worst months and they're back in business, many of them are operating, if not at total capacity, back to closer to normal pre-COVID numbers. And so I look at it less so, will they have a profitable year? Is the run rate healthy going forward? And so more and more I see it as though that run rate will be okay going forward. They will do okay, that it won't be a disaster. So more and more what I see is that they're going to be okay, largely okay. Now there are centers that were, if there's 5,400 Medicare certified centers in the country or something like that, 54 to 5,600, there were centers that were very fragile and in very bad shape before that. Those centers are probably going to be very tough, after this. In contrast, if they were in great shape before, like it'd be in pretty good shape after this.
Now, based upon all your experience in the healthcare space, what are your thoughts of surgeons having an agent?
Yeah, no, I think everybody needs someone that could look out for their interests, that's smart, that's capable, that's taking care of them, that's conscientious towards it, whether it's an agent, an accountant, a lawyer, however you want to call it and refer to it. But having a business advisor you could trust, that treats you fairly, that really feels like your economics are lined up with the person, but that really doesn't have their own agenda, it could be a very, very good thing. It just depends on the relationship, like all things.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Interview with the Surgeon. Until next time, stay focused and keep following your dreams.